are aspects that allow us to go forward, to take some of these hypotheses, to look at all of the aspects of geology, going across the entire boundary and incorporating the entire aspect of all of those attributes to work for us. So that this is the target audience, and it's just a knowledge of group. It can be developers, it can be oil and gas people, it can be hydro people, it can be anybody. And it can be screaming environmentalists as well. And all of these a demonstration that pulls together some of this so that you understand what the resources are. And the Arkansas Geological Survey now reduced to the office of the state geologist, but it still has multiple people, are going to put it online. We're going to put the data online. We have about 2,000 records. Many of these come from student theses or a combination of work that's done. Typically, it is out there. It is accessible on the web. There are a lot of things that are just unpublished. There's a tremendous amount of data that's there. A lot of graphics and all kinds of graphics associated with this. And the page numbers, insofar as this is going to the University of Arkansas Press, they have to break even at least because it's a nonprofit organization. So that's the story behind it, and I'm just going to briefly include these now. Water quality, delineating, and most of the focus of the talk later is going to be on the region of the Ozarks. So that includes 3 physiographic provinces: the Salem Plateau, which is primarily dolomitic aquifers, and the yields there are significant, much higher than in the Springfield Plateau. The Springfield Plateau outcrops in the northeast corner of your state, and there are some attributes that I will spend a lot of time on. We'll cover those. And then the Boston Mountains are primarily, these are cherty limestones, really cherty limestones. 70% of the formation of the whole province in that particular zone, primarily the Boone Formation and the St. Joe Formation. These are loaded with a lot of chert. And then the Boston Mountains are shales and sandstones. Again, the shales act like umbrellas, and there's relatively small distribution of region. The biggest spring in the state is 1 mile south of the state line with Missouri. And it comes up, it has two outlets. The upwelling comes from one of the tightest dolomitic formations we have in the entire section. Is that, I mean, how's that possible? I'll discuss it a little bit later, but on the order of 250 cubic feet per second of water comes out. And I'll show a picture later on. They dammed this up, and they utilized it for power generation earlier in the history, talking about the historical components of some of the work that was done. So this is an example out on the Savoy Experimental Watershed. We will see some of the colored water. How did the colored water get in there? Well, we do a lot of tracing, dye tracing, where the actual water moves. And this is a research site that we created. We utilize weirs, and we can measure the level of the water above the outlet point, the bottom of the outlet point, the V and the Steenhouse weir. And this allows us to get a continuous measurement of the discharge. And obviously, there are a lot of components there that are representative of how much it flowed. Most springs, though, this is an example of Blue Spring that's not far from Eureka Springs. It again is it's an upwelling spring. It's been cave dived, and the discharge comes out here, and it's on the order of 5 cubic feet per second. These aspects, though, here's different colored dyes we've used, and overall, most of our springs are relatively small. In sheer numbers, the springs of Arkansas in the southern Ozarks are generally small. The water from the biggest spring, I was going to tell you, comes from almost all has been dye traced from Missouri. So we claim it, but yeah, it ain't ours. We're claiming it this representatively. One of the other aspects I want to show, aspects about flora, some of the features like watercress. Watercress only exists where there's a continuous flow of these springs. If it's intermittent, you don't get it. And you'll see some other pictures. We can make a lot of interpretations based on the fact of what the fauna is, the flora, and that's getting into ecology and biology and how the heck. Well, I'm a geologist. I wanted to be a geologist. I've been a geologist for essentially 63 years now. I contend that we need full information from whatever source we have. And with the history that I see in this room, a lot of you have tremendous examples of things you can share with younger people, and I would encourage you to go out and do that. I've given a lot of talks. I get the dog and pony together, and we just, I'm out on the tree stump talking about it. But the attributes of what we can benefit from are really strong. So here's the tectonics and lithology part now. Is that not? Thank you. Well, I'm sorry. This is an attribute. I've worked a lot. I've had the opportunity with Walt Manger and Joy Zachary over at the university in Fayetteville, and this region of the Washpause seems to be a tremendously important tectonic consideration in my viewpoint, and I want to talk to you a little bit about it. This is out of an introductory textbook. The South America overrode the North American plate. South American plate overrode the North American plate. The creation in our region, in our state, and in Oklahoma, for the Washtenaw Mountains. And I want to focus the attention on the Ozarks that are south of that, because it's my contention and hypothesis that talks about the source of all of the silica. And I'll raise some questions later on as we go through that. But there is also the compression itself, the fact that the igneous basement flocks are much stronger than the overlying sedimentary cover. The sedimentary cover we'll talk about. Another picture associated with this, we have basement faulting that is present, and it's really defined. I'll show you the state map in just a few minutes. But as South America pushed forward toward the north, these existing basement faults they're well defined. They're well defined by wildcat wells that are drilled on either side of the faults, gravity, magnetics, all kinds of surface geophysics that were put together, and there are some abrupt changes. Some things are highly, they appear to be obvious. There's no question that these exist this way. But in other fashions, as it does push, and there's a contention, and this is a WAG, that's called a wild ass guess. And I excuse my bad language, but in any case, because the actual igneous rock is stronger, if you push these up, how do you get uplift? When I took my original geology classes, there were so many basic concepts that were, we have uplift here and we have a down dropping here, but they didn't have this glorious explanation that integrated so much of the entire globe into plate tectonics. Well, in this particular case, this is what we're looking at and what we're getting. Here's another example. Graduate students, people who, I think Dr. Manger was a paleontologist. Now, I think these are probably growth of organisms and building mounds. Well, one of our graduate students went out and studied this, and these are a lithologies. Soft sediment deformation. They're on a sloping hard rock under a component that's got a slope. And to the right, at approximately this location where the pointer is, that's the Bella Vista Fault. And the faulting, these rocks are right at the early part of the bottom of the Mississippian age formations. There were significant earthquakes, or the hypothesis was that there were significant earthquakes, and because there was enough of a slope, these things piled up, and that gave us the opportunity, these cuts, road cuts, that sometimes we don't have much information to work with. And as geologists, it's essential that we utilize those. And Sandra Chandler went out and did a really good job on these. And 50 meters away is the Bella Vista Fault. And that thing that was active at that particular time. And that's about the time we're going to talk about the introduction of all of that silica into the atmosphere. State geologic map, you can see some of these patterns. They show up even on a map at 1 to 500,000 scale. That stands out, and you can see some other patterns, and you can see they're close to the area of the fault line. Well, let's look at some of the attributes. Here's the closure. Here are the Washita Mountains, and I overlaid this. Obviously, they extend into Oklahoma. This was to a group of Arkansas geologists, and I was being very ethnocentric and sharing our pride in the state. These have been uplifted. They're far field, 150 kilometers north, where the actual compression, where the heart of where the mountain building occurred, there's uplift. And the uplift is generally, it's not nearly as great as it was in the mountain range, but on the order of about 200 meters, which is significant in my opinion. The fall line is these are non-indurated rocks. There's a Robin, the Mississippi embankment drops down, and there's some multiple stages that it dropped down way back, and then it came around. Like in this particular case, these are mostly Cretaceous and younger sediments, and this is these are associated with the components to the south. Close-up view, And the statement that I want to make is, look at the symmetry of the outcrop here, the outcrop here, and here's where the delineated faulting, Bella Vista Fault, Fayetteville Fault, Drake's Creek Fault. Those names are not necessarily meaningful to you unless you're working right in the area. There are some others that are not. They don't jump out at us as much as the others, but they appear to be. There's an abrupt discontinuity faulting in the east-west direction is truncated right at those particular zones, and the symmetry suggests that these are just like teeter-totters. You're pushing so much, the energy is there on the igneous rocks, and it pushes those together and down. These are uplifted slightly and truncated by erosion over many, many years. These are Ordovician age rocks, and they are the much larger component of the springs that we have in the region. So this synthesizes it, and the pink describes what happens, and the more lavender colors describe where the data come from, but all kinds of information that it comes from a variety of sources, but not just hydrogeology, not just springs, not just water. I'm talking about all kinds of factors, and especially the drilling records and the work that we have by all of us, all of the geologic community. And what happens further above, up in the shallower part of the fractured rocks that are uplifted, we have a definition, and we get orthogonal fracturing in these areas that are uplifted. Look at the Colorado Plateau. I mean, they've got orthogonal right angle jointing, and it's uplifted the space because here the length, as you push it up slightly, you're gaining some openness, or you're not confining the rock as much. It cracks, and the result is we get some patterns where they're solid tilted blocks of rock, and the springs we get are they're recharged by surface water and by rainfall precipitation. And if the rain were, I just lost my pointer. Is this a pointer? I guess not. I work without a pointer. You've got to be adjustable. Oh, yes. The size of the blue dots down in this corner, if it's the dip is shown by the lavender colors again, if it's a portion, we are able to calculate the boundaries of the groundwater basin by dye tracing and a combination of other approaches. And if we evaluate under low flow conditions how much water comes out of the spring, we can normalize that base flow and come up with an approach for the spring computations that we would expect from a comparable recharge area. If it's the springs are multiple springs in the direction of dip, they're smaller. That they're dividing. If it's the same geology, the same topography, the same lithology, they're reduced in size. And then in the upper block, where surface streams cut across, and there's a fault. My favorite surface stream is Spanker Creek, and it's up near Bella Vista. And Bella Vista, it cuts across Spanker Creek, and all the water goes in. There are multiple locations where this happens. And in this particular case, it shows up in that larger spring value that occurs further. Well, it occurs down there, and it picks up some of the chemistry of that swim. Some of the historic work, the dye tracing work, the patterns of flow seem to go, again, they're not perfectly right directions. There are some variations to these, and with arm waving, I can say they're identical, but the fact of the matter is that they follow that approach, and they're dominantly northeast trending with an orthogonal component that is to the northwest. And I want to get back to the chert part of the focus, and the chert occurrence in the boon is striking. And what I think I will do, excuse me, is to show you the aspect of the boon formation per se. Most of the pure phase limestone lies in the upper boon, and then you find some down in the St. Joe component. Sometimes the St. Joe is combined with the boon, and the USGS doesn't represent or doesn't recognize the fact that the St. Joe is a separate formation, but it is indeed a wonderful karst form. And this is atop the Chattanooga Shale, which in northern Arkansas is, it's on the order of about 40 to 45 feet. And it's a very regional that separates the flow across a broad area. Lithologically, you can see from the picturing in slide A, or this component of the slide as part A, is you can see some layering of the chert. Limestone gets dissolved away, and the chert fractures, but it's continuous, and there's some places where it is continuous and so forth. It plays a big role. C is another example of that middle portion of the boon, and it goes from where there are some thicker cherts above down into the lower boon all the way down to the top of the St. Joe. And these springs that are lower and the springs that are in that cherty part of the boon, they typically are artesian. They're confined both below and above, and the force of the water picks them up. And I'm sure I will make an admission that as a hydrogeologist, there are only two things you need to know: that the water flows from high energy to low energy, and it follows the path of least resistance. Oh my God, does that happen? How do those petroleum, those organic deposits move through the rocks? Well, their pressure, their combination of evolution of stresses that come to that, but this high pressure, low pressure, easier flow, and they mobilize, and structures are tectonic features. They're fracks. I was involved in some work on the Buffalo National River, which is a very popular stream in northern Arkansas. It was the first national river, and we had a hog farm that went in that was selected. And without talking about the history of all of these details, they said there is no karst, there's no dissolution of the limestone up there. Well, there is, but they're small. They were going off topographic maps only, and I challenge any of us, unless we have a scale that's very small, to look at at these sites and say that there is a karst that's active. This particular site, now we're looking at the ellipse down at the bottom over the area of the volcanic source of the ash is huge. And we're talking about distances away, and where you see the 900 feet, that's the actual thickness of the Arkansas navaculi in the area around Hot Springs. As you go further north into northern Arkansas, Benton County, and so forth, that chert represents 240, but it's in successive intervals of couplets of chert and limestone. And finally, if you get up in the Missouri and the Burlington limestone, it's not continuous at all. It's in, these are globular chert nodules that occur on bedding planes. The aspects are, there's a lot of data we're pulling these together from, but our speculation here is that it's an air deposit of volcanic ash. We hired some people to do SEM work, and the actual data that we saw shows that it is not strictly silica and oxygen that make up the chert that we see here. There are other components in it. And as you probably are well aware, you're well of the Mississippian chat tripolitic zones that are yields for traps in this portion of the country. Without going into detail in those are combinations of limestone and silica, dominant silica, but silica that has a lot of other elements that are present in it. And then finally, the overall controls of the chert layers, because they're so impermeable, they can divert vertical flow downward. And if there's any kind of tilt or any kind of irregularity, the vertical flow is diverted laterally, and it comes out as other kinds of springs along there. And we'll give you some examples of these later on. These are hypotheses, though. These are not proven facts, but think back to before. Many of you probably grew up when plate tectonics was just occurring. Some of you are young enough to experience the fact, oh, plate tectonics, yeah, that's great. And it integrates so many ideas from around our science into a single coherent whole. But they were talking about myogeosynclines and a variety of other features that were very, they were searching and scrambling to make things happen. But the integration was work that was done back in 1915, 1920. Well, let's look at some of the aspects of the boom formation, and especially the limestone chert couplets. And if you have a question associated with this, I ask you to look at some of these outcrops and some of these zones, the darker zones, or some of the dissolution zones where the limestone has been removed. It's not completely removed, but I'll show you some aspects in just a minute of what they include. But essentially, the rock type is 70% chert, and it's part of the formation. And the springs, if there is any low point, a little dip, a slight fold, these are not synclinal features per se. but they're low enough, and that's where the water goes. And as we get rain, the water level rises, and there are multiple springs that come out from this at different levels. But in this particular case, the connectivity is, in my opinion, is really important. This is a typical couplet spring, and it extends across a huge area, a wide outlet. There is some more of our watercress occurring, and we define that and we go out. The outlets to these may be, they're across broad regions, and these can be kilometers wide, and they allow us to assess the importance of the chert layers and the fact that they're so impermeable. How do they work? Well, this is coming, it's coming, we're close to the surface here, but the water's getting in, some of the water's coming over the top, but the water gets in and it hits that chert layer and it moves. And then this, I didn't include one of the other pictures because it takes so long to explain, but this colder water during this storm, this was an extreme storm, mixes with other spring water, and the attributes of water quality, I want to emphasize, dissolution plays a huge role in the dolomites and the limestones and the carbonate rocks, but yet the mixing aspects of those are huge, and the mixing component is a valuable aspect. These are the size, those are the generation of what we see in the actual springs. They are dissolved out, they're conduits, they're small caves, and they follow zones, likely different variability in the attributes of the original limestone, slight variations, and they're going to take the path of least resistance, and you've got to have a lot of water flowing through them, and that holds them all together very nicely. And you develop with much pressure behind this under high water conditions. These are squirting out like fireworks. Another aspect, this is a well. This is a dug well. This is where people go in and they need water. They're up on top of a hill, and they go down and they make the well. It's about as big as a manhole, the actual. But we put continuous monitoring transducers down there, and those show the elevation of the water. And I did not plot the location of the drain on the value, but looking at the recession curves down at the very bottom of this slide, the slopes are almost identical, and then as they drop down, as water level drops to lower and lower levels, it follows this same general trend, and it has that same general slope. Well, these ideas, I use this to reinforce the idea that the new technologies we have are just, they blow us away. That the capability of scanning electron microscopes, TEMs, horizontal drilling. These are all features that I am fascinated by, and we didn't have them. I guess my understanding is they're very recent. And in this particular case, those transducers serve us very, very well because we see changes very rapidly. Another aspect of this, oh my God, I'm talking about biology and endangered species. What the heck? What the heck's wrong with me? I'm about ready to get food. I don't know if he has any plate on that food on the on their any food on their plates, or you can wing it at me. I'm not good at that. But these show the basement fractures again. The hypothesis to some biologists is that these fish were from a general population that they are now extremely endangered, but they swam up, they got into the caves. These are cave fish, cave crayfish, crawdads, if you're a southern boy like I am. And you may look at the fracturing and look at the occurrence. There are two pieces of information I would like to point out for you. First of all, the 5 on the extreme left, they're multiplied as we go further west from Benton County and Oklahoma. But there are 2 at Cave Springs and at Elm Springs. Dr. Hayes, on Dr. Hayes's farm, he's got 7 springs. This is my buddy who worked in the USGS. He replaced me when I retired. Before I retired, up at the university. These, we feel, came from a common source. Genetically, they're looking at genetics now. They're tying genetics into these organisms. And how can you have the same genetics of a population of cave fish that they lived in different caves and they evolved under their similar conditions, but to be identical in genetic background, not so. So the reality is that these are, most of these appear to be near basement faults, but you get out into the karstified zones of the St. Joe Formation or other very karstified limestones, and they can migrate laterally. And let me show you. Here's what they look like. Takes about 80 to make that, and that's just a couple of bites. If you're gonna eat them, they are colorless, not completely colorless, but the blood and so forth. There is no exterior component. The animals don't have eyes; they can't see. There's no light in the caves, and the size is generally limited. Typically 5 centimeters is a couple of inches in there. The reason is the food source that's present in these caves that washes in through these spring systems is limited, and typically it's very simply limited. So that limits the size, and then there are major organs, they're sensory organs. You try to capture one of these. I've been out with a bunch of biologists and nets and little hand dipping, pick up here, nets, those small little nets. They're very rapid. They can move quickly, and they sense danger from the pressures associated with it. Crawdads, same thing. They are actually, the coloration in this particular case, most coloration seems to be a sexual attraction of organisms that have eyes and so forth. And typically it's the male, well, not always. And these guys, they don't mess with it. But the reality is where they occur and how they can move vertically and laterally. We think that the deep dolomitic formations are the source. They got into them where they outcropped, and they were able to move, but they're able to move to the subsurface. Now that's speculation. I'm waving my arms. I'm back on the stuff, but there's a lot of data I think that would support that, such as tanker trucks that tip over and spill the loaded gasoline and kill. There are about 100 of these cavefish come to the surface of a spring. They didn't know where They didn't know that they had that particular population present. So I think they're much more spread out. They are diverse. And the fact that cavers are not trained to see them, but biologists certainly can be. All right, and the summary of the endangered species is these are some aspects that the light green describes some of the components of where they are, but it's another approach that entails some aspects of what is actually going on with these organisms and what they can tell us about, or at least imply about some of the geology. And now let's look at spring water quality and statement that it's dominated by dissolution. I should put on surface the contamination components. It picks up that wherever the water's going, much of that those substances get entrained in the recharged water. This is how much water is coming out of Mammoth Spring, the one I showed you, the largest spring in the state, about 250 feet per second. It's the 10th largest in the conterminous U.S., the lower 48. Here's one of the biggest. This is Big Spring. It flows into the current river, a wonderful floating stream up in Missouri. The water looks like it's boiling up. It's artesian water. I want to show you in the next couple of slides some aspects of a little bit of the stratigraphy, and this is from a very old publication that is, I haven't referenced the citing there, but and I apologize profusely. The Potosi Formation, if you look at cross sections, you look at outcrops and so forth, it's dome. It's been domatized, and it gains about 13% porosity. It's over time. This is in a Cambrian. This is an upper Cambrian formation. It's been dissolved over a very long period of time, and three of the 10 largest springs in the Ozarks are three of the largest ones in the United States, the conterminous United States. So the aspects of this, and let me tell you about drillers. I need to talk about drillers because drillers do a heck of a lot of good for us. We get information at a point, and sometimes we have 100 points, sometimes we have 2 or 3, and we need to interpret. But the fact of the matter is, in southern Missouri, the water well drillers, and I'd sucker you in on that one, the water well drillers are able to, they get more than 1,000 gallons a minute. In fact, they can get up to 3,000 to 4,000 gallons a minute for public water supplies that satisfy the needs of the communities they serve. In any case, they do not, through all of the other formations, the Jeff City Formation is where Mammoth Spring, our biggest spring, comes from. And it is not a high yielding. If you drill a shallow well into that, you'll get a few gallons a minute. So obviously it must be much deeper. It must come from a deeper source. And the aspects, dissolution, I don't believe in it. I mean, it happens. Yeah, you get some water quality this way. But look at those. And we could play checkers on this. We could take big pieces of plastic and we could play chess or checkers on this. The key, how did they get so dissolved in this way, and why are they at the surface? Well, this was covered by soil. It was in a forested area. A lot of trees died. Organic debris fell into the soil as the rainwater came through. This is called subsoil karst, but it's enhanced, and all of that. This is one example. If I showed you caves, The caves near this area are, they're, they are very nicely done, but they follow the same pattern, the symmetry, the orientation of fractures, of breaks in the surface are what give us these data. So I've talked a little bit about these, and without any other thing, the Seven Plateau Springs are essential because they're dolomitic. They're calcium, magnesium carbonate. And that means that they are essentially you're dissolving the dolomite. And the same in the Springfield Plateau, but in many other areas, it's highly, limestone is easier to dissolve. And the Boston Mountains, these are zones of shale and sandstone, as I said previously. And that water quality is, if we look at the major constituents, it's mixed up, and there are some springs that are called arsenic springs, lithia springs. I need some lithia springs right now. I'm going to go out and get some lithium before I drive home. I will slow down here, and I can't slow down too much because I'm almost out of time, but there are all kinds of attributes there, and trace elements. Shales even though they're the source of many of the products that you were seeking, they also have a lot of material in them that can impact the chemistry of the water quality. So the final slide tells us that a full and a complete characterization of these was tied to integration of so many things. And we think we're really smart. Humans, look what we can do. We can, 1 billion miles out in space, we can land a ship, or we can explode something into an ice and dust fall 1 billion miles out near the edge of our solar system. But when we start talking about other things that we can't see directly, can't measure, and we can't see how to 1 billion miles, but we can predict, we can hypothesize, we can test those hypothesizations, and we can hypotheses, and we can make more. And the carbonate rocks are big players in these spring formations. I didn't talk much about them, but too bad. And all of this is tied together into a coherent form of how are we going to make stuff work? Go back and look at the old literature, the data on those ashfall from that created the church. 1927 by a professor up in Missouri. 1927, that's a long time. Now people are speculating. I think a very popular thing is it's dissolution of sponge spicules. Well, that I don't feel that the data strongly support that. But I would encourage all of you, the young ones, you guys who are retired, geezers like me, doesn't matter. Go out there and share the information you have. Allow others, fire up the kids, and being around, working around the students, the young employees in your companies, the young ones who are young. Make this, make it work, because we need every piece of information we can get. And I encourage you to do that. And I thank you. I'm through, and I apologize for my failed pointer and for the fact that I'm a little lithium deprived now. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to take them. I didn't cover the springs a whole heck of a lot, but show you some of the attributes of the shapes of Why do I think that when that ash fell on recently deposited limestone, I think some of those just globular lower contacts that suggests to me that that's soft sediment displacement. It is. They're not. It is not obvious that they can do that by a replacement mechanism over such broad areas over a range of other things. Anyway, I've got to talk myself to that. Are there any questions?
Does anybody have a quick question?
I have a question.
Yes.
What is the water quality of some of those springs? Are they all potable water? Are they something that we should avoid drinking? It looked beautiful bubbling up, but I'm assuming with all the dissolution,
That is it.
chemistry.
The chemistry, generally, it's not the inorganic chemistry. The thing that in most caves is tied to substances, bacteria, microbes, virus, bacteria, a combination of very small organisms we don't see. I took my advisor's son on a field trip, and we went into a cave, and he forgot to bring the